Hey Magic players, my name is Jesse and welcome back to another episode of the Mythic Tutor, the channel that aims to help you get to Mythic on Arena by improving your play. Only this time, we're going to go a bit of a different direction to talk about competitive Commander. Now, if you're usually here for historic content on Arena, don't worry. Over the next several weeks, I plan to be bringing you videos on Manifest Dread combo, High Noon Control, Mono Black Nightmare, and maybe even a throwback at a deck that's been around for a while, Hammer Time. But for today, we're talking EDH, or more specifically, cEDH. Over the past weekend, I competed in the Snowy Summit 2 cEDH event in Denver, Colorado, and finished in the top 4. I play somewhere between 3 and 4 cEDH tournaments a year, but I try and stay on top of what's happening in the meta. If you're familiar with how things have been going, you know that back at the end of September, Mana Crypt, Jeweled Lotus, and Dockside Extortionist were banned in Commander, which created a ton of conflict, drama, and strong opinions to be flung around. This ultimately led to the disbanding of the Commander's Rule Committee and the beginning of the next era of Commander, which is yet to be decided. This video is not about any of that. Oh, also, Nadu got banned too, and there was much rejoicing as Nadu was widely regarded to be a bad move. But due to the bans of Jeweled Lotus, Crypt, and Dockside, the cEDH meta has homogenized even more so than before. More fringe commanders that have been made more viable due to access to fast mana have now seen less and less play in the highest level tournaments, and decks that were red but without black or blue that had typically relied on Dockside combos became completely obsolete. So what we really have left in the meta is so-called blue farm, Kinnan, and my personal choice for this tournament, Thrasios Tymna. Don't get me wrong, there are a number of rogue decks floating around as well, but just look at this tournament breakdown. In this tournament of 128 players, 8 of them were blue farm, 13 of them were Kinnan, 19 of them were Thrasios Tymna, and 7 was a relative newcomer in Glarb. Glarb is a neat commander, but it's completely indicative of the mid-range focused nature of the current meta. Its whole plan is to sit around, be ignored, gain value off of the surveillability, and wait for a window to try and win. Other than those, only Sisay, Magda, and Derevi had more than 2 entries out of the 128. So at the top of the meta, you have almost completely mid-range style, value-driven decks, which try and rely on card draw engines to outvalue their opponents, only to then try to get to a point where you're able to go for a win on every turn, hopefully protected by some sort of silence effect. This has more or less been the state of cEDH now for about 6 months. Prior to the bans, decks like Rogsai provided a speed floor for the meta. It was blisteringly fast, so while Blue Farm and other mid-range decks took advantage of the near storm level of spells being cast to draw a lot of cards, Rogsai was in many cases still fast enough to win before the mid-range crew could get set up. But losing the consistency of Crypt, Lotus, Dockside, the decks just can't count on being as explosive as they used to be. Notably, exactly 0 Rogsai decks were even entered into Snowy Summit 2. So, knowing this is what the meta looks like, I want to talk a bit about the deck that I decided to choose, why it's specifically targeted at the decks that are prevalent now, and what I would change now that I've played a full tournament with it. As I mentioned, the deck that I played last weekend was Thrasios Tymna, but you'll notice that it doesn't have that much in common with the other Thrasios Tymna lists that were there at the tournament, and for good reason. Mine is called Admiral Akbar Thrasios Tymna because we try and prepare for an instant seed win and just wait for our window. Ideally when some blue farm player thinks they have the game won.
It's a trap!
This allows us to save our interaction for protecting our own combo, and you can pump fake other players into thinking that we're just another mid-range deck trying to outvalue the table. So if you want to dig deep into Thrasios Tymna and how to win on the stack, I'm going to go through a bit of a video primer on Admiral Akbar Thrasios. Let's hop in. But just to be clear, this list is not intended to be a mid-range list. Instead, is it intended to prey on them. So let's talk first about the plan of the deck. The overall goal and design philosophy of the deck is to win at instant speed. The easiest way to do this is Thassa's Oracle and Pact or Consult, but at flash speed. We can enable this with a number of flash enablers: Emergent Zone, Alchemist Refuge, Aether Vial, Court of Calling, Born Upon a Wind, and Savage Summoning. All these cards can get Thassa's Oracle on the field at any point, and the other half of the combo is already at instant speed. That is Plan A. For those unfamiliar, Thassa's Oracle's trigger when it enters the battlefield allows you to win the game if you have fewer cards in your library than your devotion to blue when the ability resolves. So, in response to that ability going on the stack, you can cast either Demonic Consultation or Tainted Pact to exile your entire library, so long as you don't run more than one copy of any basic land. Now, when we don't have the magic combination of cards together, we go with Plan B, which is typically to assemble an infinite mana, activate Thrasios in the right order, and use one of the aforementioned cards to get into the Oracle Consult combo. So, how do we make infinite mana? We have a few ways to do this. First is Devoted Druid. Devoted Druid combos with either Vizier of Remedies, Hazel's Brewmaster if Druid is in the graveyard, and Swift Reconfiguration. They work in different ways, but all essentially do the same thing. Druid can untap itself by adding a -1/-1 counter to it. Vizier of Remedies doesn't allow the counter to actually go on, allowing for free untaps, and Swift Reconfiguration turns it into a vehicle artifact. So no matter how many -1/-1 counters are on it, it won't die unless it becomes a creature again. The same with Brewmaster. Brewmaster creates a food that has the tap ability to make a green, and the untap ability, which also won't destroy it because it's not a creature. The next set of abilities that make infinite mana in the deck have a few redundancies, but also a few more preconditions. We play Bloomtender and Fabro Elder in the list, both allowing you to tap to make a mana of every color of permanents that you control. So, as long as you have one of those two, and permanents of white, blue, green, and black, which is pretty easy to assemble with our commanders and creature count, you can tap for what becomes the magic number of 4 mana. We then have a couple of cards that combo with both of those. The first is Freed from the Real, a 3 mana aura enchantment that lets you untap the creature that it's enchanting for a single blue. So, on either Bloomtender or Fabro Elder, so long as you have a blue permanent, you can make infinite green mana, and potentially infinite white and black as well. Similarly, Chain Stasis works on both of them. Chain Stasis is a spicy card from Homelands, which is widely regarded as the worst Magic set of all time. I mean, the set released in 1995, and you can still today buy a booster pack of the cards for $12. It's that bad. But this one card is pretty neat. If you have either a Bloomtender or a Fabro Elder that taps for 4 mana, Chain Stasis allows you to cast it, targeting the creature to untap it. Then you can pay 2 and a blue to copy the spell. This happens after the creature is untapped, so you can use the creature to pay for itself. This allows you to do it infinitely, making you infinite of every color except for blue. So, what do we do now that we have infinite green mana? Once you've assembled infinite green, we have a few ways to try and win the game. Thrasios has the ability of pay 4 generic mana to scry 1, then reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it on the battlefield tapped. If not, draw a card. So as long as Thassa's Oracle is still in the deck, you can activate Thrasios until you get to Court of Calling, then cast it for an X of 2 to put Oracle on the battlefield, and then respond to the trigger by drawing most of the rest of the cards in your deck to win the game. It's important to remember when you're doing this to just look at one card at a time. You don't want to accidentally draw Thassa's Oracle. All of this can be done on an opponent's turn as well if you have Thrasios out already, which is really part of the beauty of Thrasios as the commander. Thrasios itself is not worth wasting a removal spell on it 99% of the time. In fact, you'd likely remove Tymna first if given the choice because of the additional card draw. But in this specific deck, Thrasios is the key to unlocking the rest of our winning opportunities. But people typically don't see the combo coming till it's too late. So what do we try to do in other scenarios where winning the game isn't so clean? If you don't have Thrasios out, or if you're trying to win on your own turn, you're almost always going to try to do this if you have some sort of protection from spells. In this deck, we run Grand Abolisher, Cutzel, Silence, Veil of Summer, Ranger Captain of Eos, and a lot of ways to get them out of the deck. So, if you have one of those protections in place, you can simply assemble the combo as before on your own turn. But again, that's really not the main plan of the deck. You may be thinking now, how do we win the game if Oracle is exiled? Well, unfortunately we lose. That's it. Shuffle up, game over. I'm kidding. We do have enough recurring effects that can still manage to get there, but I will admit it's much more difficult. Winning without Oracle usually requires a very large Finale of Devastation and winning through combat, or something that's enabled by our opponent's board. We don't run Endurance or Time Twister, so we can't loop spells from our graveyard. We don't have a backup for Oracle. We don't run Demonic Betrayal or Praetor's Grasp to steal an opponent's Oracle, and we don't have a lot of ways to make them discard their Oracle from hand either. So, when you're playing this deck, be a bit more careful with your own Oracle. Don't waste it. That said, because of the way most Thrasios Tymna decks are built, your opponents are likely going to assume that you have lots of low-value cards that enable alternative backup win cons. We're banking on this. We've traded those in for much more spicy ways to either accelerate or protect our winning game plan. So let's talk through some of those spicy additions that make this build of Thrasios Tymna unique. First, Divining Witch. Divining Witch is demonic consultation on a creature. Yes, it takes a bit of time, but it wins the game by itself in 2 turns without having to cast any non-creature spells. It has to be responded to or removed. You can activate it for 1 and a black, discard a card, then you name a card, exiling the top 6 cards of your deck, then continuing to reveal cards until you reveal the named card, putting it in your hand. In most cases, this is Thrasios Oracle first. Then, you can activate it again the next turn to empty your library entirely to win the game with the Oracle that you just put into your hand. The best time for the first activation is the end step before your turn, so you can then save it for something else if needed. The second unique addition to this deck is Aether Vial. Aether Vial is so flexible in this build and super powerful in the early game. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a counter on Aether Vial, and then, at any time, you can tap Aether Vial to put a creature from your hand into play, so long as the creature has the same mana value as the number of counters that are on Aether Vial. Under most circumstances, we don't let the Vial go any higher than 2 counters unless there's something very specific and meaningful at 3 in our hand. The ability to cheat directly into play a Grand Abolisher, a Thrasios Oracle, or some other high-value creature or combo piece is hugely underrated. I honestly don't know why more decks aren't on this card. Sure, it's not great to draw late in the game, but neither is Birds of Paradise. The next spicy addition on the list is Fiend Artisan. In a lot of situations when going up against a blue farm or another control list, the ability to fire off a potentially game-winning or win-line protecting spell to grab a creature from your library just isn't going to resolve. A lot of your opponents will realize this and work together to counter a Neoform or a Finale of Devastation or a Green Sun Zenith, knowing that if it resolves, they're going to lose. But there are not a lot of interaction spells to counter creatures in the current meta. So, while we trade a bit of speed with Fiend Artisan, this enables us to assemble our combo without casting any spells at all. Sure, it's susceptible to Opposition Agent and can be just removed, but similar to Divining Witch, it really has to be interacted with. If you play enough creatures that must be interacted with, people simply won't have enough interaction to do so. Another spicy addition for this list is Savage Summoning. I think this card is great and I never see it in other lists. For 1 green, it can't be countered, and the next creature spell you cast also can't be countered and can be cast at flash speed. For trying to go for a Thrasios Oracle win over the top of an opponent's winning play, or when everyone else has already tapped out to stop something, this card is invaluable. Having this card, Oracle, and Consult, or Pact in hand together means you can sit and wait with 4 mana for the right window, and you don't have to interact with anything. Alternatively, you can also bluff a little bit. If you want to say, hey, I'm going to use this Tainted Pact or this Demonic Consultation to look for an answer or a response to a win, you exile your entire library. If you have the mana to Savage Summoning and then Oracle, they can't counter it. You're probably going to win that game. And then finally, a card that really works out as a pseudo-win condition in the deck is Survival of the Fittest. Unlike the other spicy additions, you're going to see survival in a lot of TNT lists, so it's not particularly spicy in this one. But we have ways to abuse it very quickly and at instant speed. You can use it to go get Thrasios Oracle, obviously, or you can use it to get Devoted Druid and then use it again to put Devoted Druid in the graveyard and get Brewmaster, or you can use it to get a protection piece if that's what you're missing. It's a really super flexible addition. So let's talk through the rest of the deck pretty quick. If you're familiar with cEDH, you'll recognize that there are a lot of commonalities in the rest of this list with the current meta because, frankly, they're some of the best cards in our colors. First, we have our card draw abilities. Mystic Remora, Rhystic Study, Esper Sentinel, Archivist of Ogma, Ledger Shredder, Talion the Kindly Lord, and the One Ring. Each of this help us to get to our winning pieces faster. Next, our tutors. Demonic Tutor, Worldly Tutor, Vampiric Tutor, Enlightened Tutor, Imperial Seal, Diabolic Intent, Eladamri's Call, and Spellseeker. In most cases, they're all flexible enough to get the other half of whatever combo you already have in your hand or in play. Then we also have tutors that put creatures straight on the battlefield. Finale of Devastation, Court of Calling, Green Sun Zenith, and Fiend Artisan. Next, we have our additional mana. Avacyn's Pilgrim, Birds of Paradise, Bloom Tender, Delighted Halfling, Devoted Druid, Noble Hierarch, Deathrite Shaman, and Fabro Elder, along with our artifact mana in Chrome Mox, Lotus Petal, Mox Diamond, Arcane Signet, and Sol Ring. Next, we have our suite of on-the-board interaction: Swords to Plowshares, Cyclonic Rift, Deadly Rollick, Orcish Bowmasters, Abrupt Decay, Odawara, and Boseiju. Honestly, we don't have a ton of them, so use them wisely. Then our stack interaction, which again is to prioritize protecting our own combo. Silence, an offer you can't refuse, Fierce Guardianship, Flusterstorm, Force of Negation, Force of Will, Mental Misstep, Mindbreak Trap, Pact of Negation, Veil of Summer, and Swansong. Finally, we have our flexible or value-based cards. Born Upon a Wind enables us to win at any line at flash speed. Leyline of Anticipation allows us to wait until the previous end step to do anything so we don't give away our plan. Mockingbird is a super flexible clone card. Reanimate allows us to go after a combo line that got interrupted before, or take somebody else's valuable creature from the graveyard. Crop Rotation can get us a Gaia's Cradle early, or it can be used to turn a green mana into a blue mana at the end of the game when we desperately need it. Finally, Noxious Revival gives us a flexible counter to other win attempts, while also allowing us to reuse certain spells or cards from our graveyard. That just about does it for the deck list. If you want to peruse it yourself, I put it in the description. In the tournament, I ended up getting 2 wins, 1 loss, and forcing 2 draws in the Swiss rounds. I say forcing because in both instances I had threatened to win myself, as did an opponent, and a draw was the only way to stop both of us. As a quick aside, draws suck. We should not be incentivizing them in tournaments, as it forces the meta into a box that make decks play differently. But the most interesting game of the night was my top 16 win. I will say the main challenge of the deck is usually how to win in strange scenarios. In this case, my opponents had Obnixilis, Orcish Bowmasters, Root Maze, and Concordant Crossroads out. It comes to my turn because thankfully on the turn before, Blue Farm had tried to win by casting Silence, but an opponent used their Dualcaster Mage to copy it. So we get to my turn. I have to blow all of my resources and eat 2 counterspells to do it, but I'm able to assemble infinite green mana. But all I have access to is that green mana. Thassa's Oracle is unfortunately already in my hand. Fortunately, Thrasios is on the board, but so is Bowmasters, which means that any win attempt I make has to be on the stack above those triggers. Otherwise, my opponent will point all the damage at Thrasios to keep me from drawing, or ultimately at my face and my opponent's face to kill us. Unfortunately, Veil of Summer was already countered earlier in the turn, so it's also in the graveyard. So let's talk about how the board impacts our thought process. Bowmasters means anytime we try and draw a card with Thrasios, the opponent can point a ping of damage somewhere, so we can't let the stack resolve at any point once we start to go for it. Root Maze means we can't use Crop Rotation to get a blue mana into the battlefield. Our artifacts also are going to come in tapped. So we have to come up with an alternative plan. We actually have 2 outs here, but I'm going to go through the one that I thought of first. So first, we activate Thrasios, revealing the top card and drawing it. Usually here we scry 1, but in this case, we don't want to because we don't want to accidentally put Boseiju on the battlefield tapped. So we use Thrasios on top of the Bowmaster's trigger to keep taking cards into our hand. Ultimately, we get to Boseiju. Once we see Boseiju, we instead scry it to the bottom, remembering which card was directly above it. Then we use Noxious Revival to put Veil of Summer back on top of the library, which will allow us to draw 1 single card when it resolves. This accomplishes 2 things for us. First, we can now use Boseiju to destroy the Root Maze, which will unlock Crop Rotation to get a blue land from the library untapped, once the Root Maze is gone. Additionally, the Veil of Summer has a second additional ability. Resolving means that we can no longer have our creatures or ourselves targeted by Bowmasters, so if we really needed to, we can let the stack resolve. In this case, we'd rather not, because if we do, our opponent would then kill the mono green player, taking away Concordant Crossroads. So, with our single blue mana, we can now cast Born Upon a Wind, ultimately allowing us to cast Arcane Signet, Mox Diamond, or Lotus Petal, and any additional mana dorks to get enough blue to cast Oracle. From there, we can try to win again. Now, some of you may have noticed there's a second winning line here that I missed, which is what I eventually ended up doing more or less on accident, thanks to Concordant Crossroads. I have Savage Summoning in the deck, which allow me to cast Birds of Paradise at instant speed, plus it has haste from the Crossroads, so I can then make the 1 blue to turn on all of my spells with Flash with Born Upon a Wind, and win as mentioned before. But this game really highlights the power of the deck. Everything we did happened on the stack, on top of enough damage to kill me and all the other opponents if we let it resolve. But that's exactly where we want to be. It allows us to negate draws a little bit as well, as instead of trying to force a draw in a lot of scenarios, we can instead just try to win ourselves. Sure, sometimes this still happens in a draw, but it puts more of the power in our hands. So let's talk now about some of the cards that really underperformed and what I plan to be swapping in for them instead. First, we had 2 card draw engines that just seemed to not really do enough to hold their slot in the deck. Ledger Shredder and Archivist of Ogma. Unfortunately, with Opposition Agent everywhere, people just simply aren't searching the library enough for Archivist to become meaningful. I'd much rather just play my own Opposition Agent or an Aven Mind Sensor to punish them from searching in the first place. Second, Ledger Shredder lets you see a lot of cards, but you often end up having to pitch cards that you actually need. If you have another draw engine online, it's not that big of a deal, but if not, it ends up hurting you a lot. And for that, it feels a bit more like a win more card. Plus, both of them don't give you a choice to draw or not, so if you have to be careful trying to win with Oracle with them on the board. Next, Fiend Artisan. I mentioned it above, and I do love the ability to win without using the stack, or at least assemble a game-winning combo or get our protection out. But it ends up just being a little bit too slow and too mana intensive to really work out. Rarely does it survive a turn around the table, and then even if it does, it usually means your opponents had a lot more important things to deal with than worrying about it. Similarly, Talion, which is basically a 4-mana heuristic study, is cool, but it's too much of an investment for too little of a payoff. Next, Leyline of Anticipation. I'll admit this was a bit of an experiment going into this tournament in the first place. The idea being that we get flash for the entire game. Unfortunately, even if this is in your opening hand, we don't necessarily win the game with it, and often just become more of a target. Finally, Delighted Halfling. I love the idea of an uncounterable Cutseller Tymna, but honestly, nobody's countering Tymna in the first place, and too often, Delighted Halfling simply taps for 1 colorless mana when you really could have used the blue. As for the cards I'm swapping in, I've added Carpet of Flowers instead of Halfling, and though it doesn't make mana on an opponent's turn, it does allow for more setup, and often has a much higher upside. I've cut Leyline for Valley Floodcaller and High Fade Trickster, giving us some more flexible flash speed options, and another win line using Retraction Helix. To explain that combo really quick, with Valley Floodcaller out, without Summoning Sickness, or if you already have a Birds of Paradise out, you can cast Retraction Helix targeting the one that doesn't have Summoning Sickness. This allows it to bounce a permanent by tapping it, then Floodcaller untaps all of your birds when you cast a non-creature spell. So you can bounce a Mox Amber or a Soul Ring, for example, cast it, untapping the Floodcaller or the Birds of Paradise, allowing you to then tap the Amber or the Soul Ring for mana, float the mana, and repeat the process, assembling infinite mana to pour into Thrasios. To make room for Helix and Trickster, I cut Cyclonic Rift and Reanimate. Reanimate is a great card, and in most lists it still makes the cut, but here it just isn't really part of any of our plans, and it's much more of a backup card. To counter that, I've also added in Seedborn Muse. I've kept it out for so long because it just never felt like part of our main game plan, but the card is simply too good to not play. There's also another reason with Birthing Pod that I'll get to in a minute, but we'll see what happens after a few months of it in there. I added Mox Amber as a way to combo with Floodcaller, and as a way to have mana if we have a commander, cutting Ledger Shredder. I added Permission Denied instead of an offer you can't refuse. Too often an offer just isn't enough to actually stop anyone since you're giving them the treasures, especially if we're trying to use it to protect our own win. The extra side benefit of Permission Denied is that it can be used to stop an opponent from winning, then on the same turn open up a winning line for us. You can use this politically very, very easily. Finally, Alchemist Refuges seem to be just too much to activate, so I swapped in Flooded Grove to help give us some mana transformation from green to blue. Finally, I cut Neoform, Deadly Rollick, and Freed from the Reel to give us a new line with Birthing Pod, Derevi, Felidar Guardian, and Machine God's Effigy. Not only is Machine God's Effigy another combo with Devoted Druid, it can also combo with Felidar Guardian. Birthing Pod itself can then get most of our pieces out, or ramp into a Seedborn Muse the first turn that it comes out. This new list is also in the video description, so check it out and let me know what you think. With these changes, the deck now plays a bit more proactively and has some more pivot lines, but it doesn't feel like it recovers as well from losing tempo or not having enough cards in hand. We'll see if it's worth the trade-off. If you have more in-depth questions about playing the deck, let me know. I'm glad to elaborate. Otherwise, I hope to see you out there, either on Arena or in person. And until then, let's win some more games together.